Hello, this is an AS OCR revision video. This video is not what's on the board behind, it's not on the board there. It's actually January 2012 question 7. This is from the F581 Markets in Action paper. Sorry, just trying to find something. This paper, just to give you a quick overview, because I'm not going to do the rest of the paper due to time restraints. This paper focused solely on sort of chewing gum, the externalities of that. I have to say, this video is actually for a specific name on YouTube, which I won't mention, because it'll be in the title description box. Just get rid of this. So this sort of video is this. I think I need to mention this. Is the most difficult question ever set on F581. The reason for that is because this question in particular is not a standard subsidy or regulation or even information provision question or even pollution permits question. This is a mix of absolutely everything apart from the last thing I mentioned. So structuring this answer, personally, I think was the most difficult. Again, I'm not I'm not a teacher of economics. I'm just a student. So what I'm going to do now is using sort of, it doesn't tell you explicitly in the mark scheme, if you're watching it, how to answer this question. It gives you 4 things, and I will sort of use that as a basis, and I've created what I think is the best question, way of answering this question. Okay, so let's get started. The question says, so I'm just getting to it. It says, use lines 19 to 28 and give 4 ways in which a market failure arising from discarded chewing gum might be corrected. Discuss which of these ways might be the most effective in correcting this market failure. Now that, just in itself there, is one of the hardest things I've ever seen. So, if we don't get all panicky about the question, the first thing you do is define the terms. So what we're given there is use lines 19 to 28. So we look at lines 19 to 28. And I've read through them and just picked out 4 points. The Singapore that's going to look at a ban, some kind of ban. There's provision of information on the cost of cleaning up the chewing gum, an increase in the direct tax or fines. So indirect tax is like taxes levelled on sort of products, not income. So on spending even. So the ones we're going to define in there is market failure, negative externalities, because that's what it is, taxation, regulation, information provision, and is there anything else I missed? Don't think of anything else I missed. So regulation, taxes, information provision, market failure, and negative externalities. So that pen's trying to get away from me. I'm not going to write them all down because I kind of need the board space for other things. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lay this out logically, and any steps I need to sort of go through in big detail, I'll use the board space, but I'll have to rub it out obviously, so I'll keep it all on one board. So obviously the first thing I said we're going to do is define. I said market failure, so just as I'm writing this down, market failure occurs each and every time a free market with no government intervention fails to lead to the best or optimum use of scarce resources. So get that pen. Taxes. So a tax is a charge or duty, and an indirect tax is a tax on like expenditure. So they're two indirect and direct. You talk about tax and then you talk about the indirect part of it. We talked about regulation. So regulation is a standard or a legal requirement set by the government with the intention of lowering consumption or production of a good. Information provision. Information provision is giving the individual the correct or the correct information to allow the individual to make a rational decision on the choices. I don't know how I'd end that a little bit. I'd probably end it a little bit different on that, but never mind. I think that's it, isn't it? Market failure type of regulation. You can talk about bans, but that's kind of regulation, so you know, you can define it how you wanted to. Right, okay, so let's get on to asking the question. Now the question actually says, which way of solving market failure is the best? So what we've got to use is we've got to use the 4 ways they've told us. So they've told us in the case study, they told us about bans, provision of information, indirect tax, and regulation. So how are we going to sort of break this up? Okay, so what I'm going to do now is going to overview what we're going to do, and I will go through it in stages. So the first thing we're going to do for this question is say how each one of these works. So told us, I'll underline them. It told us about regulation, told us about information provision, and told us about taxes. Didn't tell us market failure is them, so just them 3 last things. So they're the 3 ways of solving this. So obviously the first thing we're going to need to do is say how each one of these works. And I think we should start with regulation, because that you can immediately think, well, there's a basic demand and supply diagram for that. I know I can draw that. And if you don't draw a diagram in an 18-mark question, it's going to get you're going to go like, well, okay, well, I'm going to get my evaluation sort of marks there. So regulation. So yeah, actually I'll put this in sort of a thing. So first paragraph. Well, this is your first paragraph, but your first real paragraph of the essay is I'll put regulation. So obviously if it's asking you to discuss which one of these ways is the most effective, you don't go through one way and then just say, oh, well, you can use the other ways at the end. You need to go through each way in the questions when it's asking you. Otherwise you're only going to get limited marks. I'm not sure exactly what band it'll put you in, but probably be band 3, I would have thought, if you did it really well. So regulation, so we know regulation is a restriction on supply, basically, because it's impacting on you need to go back to the case study. I just need to reread it a second, say what regulation. So the 2 types of regulation. The first thing you need to do, without even knowing what type of regulation it's impacting on, draw a basic demand and supply diagram, label your equilibrium E, put your price level P, your quantity, demand and supply Q. Obviously label your axis. I'm just going to double check. So I've read this before, I just need to double check which what type of regulation it is. So it says line 19 to 28, so if you look in your case study, it's the last paragraph, all of it, and if you read to, line is it, regulation, sorry I'm just trying to find the regulation part of it. So the regulation is the fines on the people who are discarding the chewing gum. So it's a regulation on the consumer. I thought it wasn't the supply. So you shift the D curve to D1. Mine's a bit curved, but it shouldn't be. It should be straight. But that's purely because I don't have a ruler. Well, I do, but you can't really use it on a whiteboard. So as we see, the impact on the price and with the quantity demanded. Now what you'd do for this, you would just explain one way regulation works. So in relation to the case study, it's the heavy fines. So I just put heavy fines. And then you would explain this paragraph in the context of the... Sorry. Oh dear, sorry. So you would explain this in the context of an 8 marker or a 10 marker. Basically a demand and supply diagram. So what you say is you start by saying the shift. So you say the demand curve is shifted from D to D1 because of the increase in heavy fines, and people don't want to buy the chewing gum because they want to discard their chewing gum, and if they get fines for that, they're going to use something else to discard or get rid of or whatever. So you could say that. That's obviously that you say why it shifted. You take the shift. You say why it shifted, which we've just done. You say the impact on price. So therefore, the reduced demand is reduce the price from P to P1 and reduce the demand and supply from Q to Q1. Therefore, you talk about the magnitude. So you say the magnitude of the decrease in price and decrease in quantity demanded and supplied is dependent on the decrease of the shift of demand. And now as we're shifting along the demand curve, you could also say the more inelastic the supply curve, the greater change in quantity supply on the price than quantity demanded and supplied, because it's price inelastic in supply, and that would mean your supply curve is steeper. So that's what you do for that. I'm not sure if you can quite see that diagram on the board, but basically what it is, demand curve shifting left from D to D1, just a shift of the demand curve there. So that's how you talk about regulation. I'm going to leave that up actually. So your second paragraph, just so I'm only leaving that up, I'll rub it out in a minute, just so you can see the differences between them. So I'll sort of corner it off a little bit. So second paragraph, now we've taught regulation, so you tick that. You could do this as a plan, so you tick your regulation off. That's one thing actually I should stress at the beginning. For this question, because it's not a simple like where you know the answer or you don't, this is sort of your logic of setting it out, which is a bit sort of preparing you for F582, where you've got to do that in your answers. So you define the terms, you've got to include you say how each of them works. So we've talked about regulation, information provision. Now, what we know is goods that need information provision are merit or demerit goods. And now, because these are overconsumed, we can say they are demerit goods because they're bad for people and they actually realise this. Someone else has to clean it up. So you draw another basic demand and supply diagram. However, in this context, instead of drawing just demand and supply and talking about it in the context of regulation, the information provision is talking about letting people know how bad it actually is. So campaigns and pressure groups, I think he talked about in the case study, you just had to check there, are forcing these people to stop demanding the product. So if they stop demanding because they know how bad chewing gum is for other people, on the bus. So basic supply curve, we draw a demand curve, but instead of leaving it D and D1, which is quite similar to this diagram at the moment, but as we know, this is a demerit good, so they're overconsumed. So the high level demand curve is what we call an incorrect level of demand. And you could put in brackets that's the current, because the current is always in the incorrect level. You'd never want to move it to the correct level. You never move it on to the incorrect. You'd always be on the incorrect if you want to change it. That's just logic, really. And then you've got your correct level of demand, and this shifts that way because of the pressure groups. And again, you explain it in the context of... well, actually, you don't need to explain it in the context of an 8 marker, do you? I guess it wouldn't hurt if you've got a lot of time. It depends what time you've got left in an exam. If you get up to this point, you've got 40 minutes left. What I do is I do another 8 sort of answer again. But if you run out of time, you've got 20 minutes left. What I do is skimp over, because you already explained the 8 marker in this context in the regulation. But again, I'm only saying this if you're running out of time. But if you're not running out of time, wouldn't hurt to do another 8 mark analysis, because this is a different cause. So your second paragraph is... I just put IP, but what I mean is information provision. And you talk about the reducing price, the exact same effects on... but again, I'm not sure it would get you, as again, I'm not a teacher, so I'm not 100% sure you'd get more marks for it, but... because you are talking about the incorrect and correct levels of demand, so it's not exactly the same sort of answer as for regulation, because regulation is simple. And then your second paragraph is information provision. Your third paragraph, so we've drawn 2 diagrams, so that strengthens our analysis intensely, and it makes us look different from the next person who sat in the exam who's thinking, whoa, what's happened? That's a tricky question, what am I going to put next? well, it's this. Just think it logically, define the terms, logically work through and say, well, yes, how does that work? And then we're going to go on to the advantages and then conclusion. So it's actually easier than the subsidy if you can get your head around it. But again, it's a lot easier said than done, because we're saying this now, but you might have got to the exam in January 2012 and looked at that question and gone, oh my god. I know I would have done. If I was in that exam, I would have gone, well, I can't do this. But now we're logically thinking through it, you should be able to apply this method to other questions. Because I am sure, if you're getting this so far, this is the hardest question that you'll ever be set. Unless your weakness is pollution permits, which mine was, but we've done a video on that, which I'm not sure will be up yet. So your third paragraph, there you go. We talked about regulation, information provision and tax. Information provision and regulation. So what we're going to talk about now is taxes. Now what I do for this, I'm not sure, again, it depends on how much time you have left, which is why I'd leave this as not an 8-mark question, because you've already done it for that. So your third paragraph, you could actually use a negative externalities diagram. So, if you're familiar with the externalities diagram, you should be, if you're going into the exam. Alright. This should be the biggest diagram, really, because it's the most difficult to draw. So you've got your SMC equals your PMC1. Again, this is very, very not very good. You got your PMB equals SMB. This is really bad. I'm really sorry about this. And then you've got your, obviously you've got your Q and S, quantity supplied and demanded, and you've got your price. And then you've got your, you just label it as your free market equilibrium, which I think we went through at the start of one of the previous videos. So again, that's not brilliant. That's not actually nowhere near finished for that question. I'll just kind of sketch it on very quickly. Just give me a minute. So don't forget your welfare loss triangle. I'm just going to put this, I'm not going to label it too much. So you've got your P1, you've got your P, and you've got your Q, or you've got your Q1. I would say that's a welfare loss triangle. You label it market equilibrium, so you've got your free market, you've got your thingy market, your socially optimum, and then you put your tax, circle that and put tax. And then that's your other addition. And then you just explain that in the 5 paragraphs we've been taught. So just go through them now while I'm out of the way a little bit. So I know the isn't fully labelled, but if hopefully you can. I'm not going to go through the externalities diagram because I've done that in another video and you wouldn't find watching that appropriate. So again, the paragraphs, you say where the equilibrium are. So your first paragraph, doesn't matter which way around you do it in this instance. So you say the free market equilibrium occurs at point, whatever point you've put. I normally put, well, it's where PMC equals PMB, but if that's point A or C or whatever it is for you, you say that occurs at that point corresponds to the price level P and a quantity demanded Q. That's all you need to say, and say where the curves intersect as well. So where PMC equals PMB. And obviously you need parent margin, benefit, etc. Then you socially optimum equilibrium occurs at point, it's normally A, but it's where SMC equals SMB. This corresponds to the price level P1 and a quantity demanded and supplied Q1. And they say the decision maker only takes into account the private marginal costs. This is because they ignore or are unaware of the external cost which impacts on a third party and is not taken into decision by the decision maker. You say what line this is represented on the diagram, BC, or basically the line up sort of the side of the welfare loss triangle. So I'll sort of zoom in on that a little bit. So my finger's massive, but it's just that little line going up there. Yeah, it's way big. Sorry about that. So it's just that little line going up there, and then you say, after saying that, you say subsequently, there is the decision maker price is too low at P. This generates too level higher demand at Q. This means we are over consuming this good, so we're devoting too many resources, scarce resources, to the production of this good. Therefore, we are allocatively inefficient and the market has failed. And then you say, however, had the decision maker taken into full social cost, private and external, he would have charged a higher price, P1. This corresponds with a high level of demand, Q1. Therefore, we are devoting the correct amount of scarce resources to this good or service, therefore the market will no longer fail. So you just explain that. So that should take you a good couple of sides to, if you've done them properly. That's why I wouldn't do the information provision as such a large 8 marker, because you run out of time at this point if you've done it that way. But again, depends on, if you get to this point, you've done the essay and you think, yes, I'll go back and add a bit more, by all means do. So, what we do is we do the disadvantages and advantages to both. Again, as I said, I keep mentioning this just in case, because I had one of my videos and someone commented I'm saying not very professional. So I just stress this again, I'm not a teacher, but I try my best to help people. So, what you do now is you do your disadvantages and advantages. As again, I will say this again, you can listen to me or not, it doesn't matter. So, the advantage of regulation, advantage of taxation, advantage of information provision. And you do a disadvantage of tax, regulation and information provision. Let me miss one out. You could do ban, but again, you can't really draw a diagram for that, so maybe in your 4th paragraph, if you wanted to, I've not included it there, but you could talk about the ban. You just say, basically it works because no one's allowed to use it. So that's a ban. I should have mentioned that. Yes, so you do advantages of ban, taxation, regulation, and information provision, and yeah, that's it. So I'll just get out of the way, so we can keep writing them diagrams. So your advantages of taxation could be it generates revenue. So I'll just put that in brackets. So generates revenue, and obviously this can be used to fund positive externalities. So I'll just put in brackets tax. Just make sure you've got a evaluative point for each one. So your your generates revenue for the government, that's a tax point. And then you talk about the regulation point. It's backed by the law, so that's a regulation. By law. So that's your reg, I just put regulation. And then another point could be your advantage of information provision. So it means people are more likely to follow it if they know what the reason is, more likely to follow it, especially if they're pressured to follow, which you could link to the case study. It says mentioned a couple of groups that force people to do that, and you can mention them, the names of them groups. So that's a regular. I just put IP, but you know what I mean, information provision. And then you could talk about an advantage of banning, so which means people are forced to follow it. It's a legal requirement. So, but that's kind of the same as backed by law with the regulation. So you couldn't really do that. You could say regulation doesn't generate any revenue. And obviously, when you're doing these advantages, you say the advantage compared to another one. So, advantage of tax is that it generates revenue where regulation doesn't. So, that means regulation doesn't generate revenue is a disadvantage. And that's obviously one for regulation. No, it's about your other disadvantage could be of taxation. So taxation, it's hard to set a value. So you could put actually that for all of them, hard to set value, and that's for tax and reg. Information provision, we haven't done disadvantage. Well, as we know, information provision, you can give people the information they need, but if it's a habit forming good, which chewing gum is, well, it's not really habit forming good, but people feel cool when they're doing it. So we could say, I said cool wrong, didn't I? Never mind. So basically what I'm saying is, you do the advantage of each of them, so advantage of tax, advantage of regulation, advantage of information provision, all as opposed to not just a random advantage of taxation. You've got to link it into the other two, why it's better than the other one. Because it says evaluate. The question is asking you to evaluate which is the best way. So if you just give an advantage of one, that's irrelevant to the question. You need to go advantage of one opposed to the other, which also gains your evaluation marks, which is kind of the key in 18-mark questions. So you do that, and then you say advantage of disadvantage of them. So regulation doesn't generate revenue. Advantage of tax and regulation, it's hard to set a monetary value because what price do you put on having someone to clean it up? I mean, it's very good. You can put a physical cost on someone actually being paid to put it out, but can you put a physical cost on maybe the tourism it distracts because the ground is littered with these pieces of chewing gum? So that's when you can put. Now for information provision, I just put IP, not followed, not needed to follow. Because you can put the information out there, but one of the information failures is people don't act on it. Not needed to follow. So people could follow it without knowing it, and people could know it but not follow it. So that is your main body of your essay. So you define the terms market failure, tax, information provision, and banning. But mainly banning is regulation, so you kind of link it into one. Say how each of them works, and then say advantages and disadvantages of them. See, I came up with this in about 3 minutes of planning it. Actually, before I did this video, I created like a little summary sheet. I'll show it you now. So I'll come over to the camera, actually put it in front of the camera. This is the summary sheet. So if you're watching the Kai who commented on YouTube, sorry, I just forgot your name. Really sorry about that. So this is the kind of diagram thing I created. So damn it, zoom out. Sorry, I just have to get around. So this is the summary sheet I created. So if you look on top, I said, well, obviously for any 18-mark question, you define the terms, and so I did this in about 5 minutes. I'm not a genius, I really am not. I didn't do, you know, sometimes I get an A, most of the time I get an A, but the truth of the matter is, I'm not a genius. I never get full marks. Well, I never get 0 marks. I always, when I started F58, I used to struggle with the essays, even the basic ones. But now, I think about it logically and think, right, what can we do in this question? Well, every 18-mark question, you define the terms, and then I just thought, right, what can I do now? I need to include the diagram, and how can I do that? Well, I thought, for a regular, what do I do for each one of these essays, and how do I combine it into one essay? So, well, I know for regulation, I say how it works, and I thought, if I do that for every one, I can include maybe 3 or maybe even 4 diagrams if I'm, you know, picky. And include as many diagrams as you can, but I just say don't include a diagram for the, you know, for the sake of it. That's why I've not included a banning diagram. I've not really mentioned it much. So as you can see, yeah, I've gone through each of the paragraphs, said what I'm going to do, and then see, I've not made any like explicit notes. I've just sort of commented on. You can ask for what I do is ask for a piece of paper in the exam and sort of, you know, go through it and make some notes, because this is. You may think, well, I thought, well, you know, it's going to cost me like 10-15 minutes trying to think of this answer. Whereas if you go through it logically and think, right, well, what can I do? That 5 minutes you spent at the start of the question saves you 20 minutes or something when you're writing the essay, because you could get it all muddled up and lose so many marks for trying to get through it quickly. Because, I mean, there is a race to get it through it quickly, but there's more of a race to get your marks. That was just a quick overview. So we said, what you say is advantage of, you define the terms, say how they work, state advantages of each of them in compared to the other one, and then your conclusion is based on sort of summing up them points. So I haven't really done a conclusion because I think that you're more than capable now of doing that. We've sort of done some evaluation in there, so you might just end up repeating yourself. But obviously, you need to include a conclusion, no matter what, just to cover yourself, really. You know, I'd never not do a conclusion unless you run out of time, but just evaluating them points as you're going through the advantages means if you get to the end of the thing and you say, oh no, I've not done a conclusion, if you've done some evaluation marks, hey, you're going to get some marks at the conclusion because you've sort of spread it out over the essay, if you get what I'm saying. So yeah, so you just sum up them points. However, I'm not going to tell you how to, because there's no right answer. You just put what you want for the conclusion. I'm sure if you look on the mark scheme, the guide for the conclusion is a lot easier than the guide for marking the essay. But as again, the quality of how much I've done there is really dependent on how you expand on it. So, I mean, that is the basis for the essay, and you can just take it off however you want. I mean, there's no way, you know, specific apart from the grades of analysis. So you just say what this means, what causes, consequences, etc. Which you sort of do logically by just explaining the diagrams. So you got my towel there. So, that is the overall sort of impact of question 7. I hope that's been, you know, you've been able to watch that for half an hour now. And, you know, it'll be useful in the future or something. But I hope that, I mean, that was January 2012, so you could get that this year. I mean, that could be a similar question to this year, because it's the last exam they're going to sit. So they might, I reckon, if they're going to do a really hard question, as you know, to go out with a bang on the last essay question, it's either going to be this, or information provision. I think that's what it is. I'd revise that thoroughly. I did go over pollution permits in another video, but trust me, pollution permits is nowhere as difficult as that. Just pollution permits are, but I haven't really mentioned them in that video. So again, that's the end of it. I don't know what else to add to that. If I've not done anything correct, diagrams or whatnot, or I've labelled the diagrams wrong. As I said, you do know I've mentioned I've not put the axes on, but obviously you do that in an exam. It's got to take me half an hour to go through it, so it'll take me a lot more to write it. Hopefully that's been intuitive, and we'll see you in the next video.